Hey folks, this is a new tutorial about fragment shaders in Max. I'm going to pick up where I left off last time. I'm going to talk about different shapes, how to have shapes other than spheres in our ray marching scene, and I'm going to color them differently. So let's start by exploring different shapes. So far we have looked at the sphere as a length function from the point in space, from my ray marching point to the position of the sphere minus the radius. It will give me a sign distance that I can use for my ray marching to extract a sphere. If I want to get some other shapes, I can definitely do that. I will need to get different SDF functions. And the one-stop shop to do that, it's Inigo Quiles' website. Inigo Quiles is the person who's most active in developing SDFs in fragment shaders and is one of the creators of Shader Toy. So on his website, he has a lot of primitives for sign distance functions that we can use to get our scene. So let's grab a couple of functions. For instance, we can grab a box, and all I need to do is just copy this text and paste it into my shader file. I already grabbed a capsule and a torus, so I think I have enough to make an example of having different shapes. So here I have a sphere, and the sphere has vec4, so that's slightly different from last time. I have a vec4 that is the position of the sphere on the x, y, and z planes, and the radius is on the w plane, so on the last plane. And then I have a torus with the SD torus function, and I'm passing the P, my ray marching point, and a vec2. The vec2 is the radius of the torus, of the donut, and the second value of the vec2 is the thickness of the donut. So, but right now I am only rendering the sphere, and if I want to see the torus, I have to do a union function, or as I talked about last time, a min function. So if I do min torus and sphere and save, then I have my torus appearing. If I want to have more than one object, so let's say now I want to also have a float, I want to have let's draw a box and do SD box, and let's go see what the box requires. It requires, of course, the ray marching point, and then a vec3 for the 3 dimensions of the box. So the height, the width, and the depth, I guess. I can do minus vec3, and let's put it also a little bit in the back. And so I just saved, but nothing happens, because as you can see, I'm still getting the union of the sphere and the torus, and I'm not getting the box. So what I should do is do another line of code where I do another min function, and I take the res that I have, so the min between the sphere and the torus, and I add the box to it. So now I have the min between all of 3 of these objects, and I should see that. So if I want to have different objects to be colored in a different way, I need to be able to identify them in my final rendering step when I'm doing coloring and lighting and all that. So in order to know which objects I have hit when I go into my rendering step, meaning here, my intersect function will need to return not only a distance value, but also an ID. So this will need to be a vec2 where my hit is going to be two components, the distance and an ID. To do that, I need to change, first of all, my map function, and so that it will return not only the distance, but also the ID. And I can do, first of all, return a vec2, have the my res to be a vec2, and initialize it as vec2 of distance 0 and -1 for a default value, for an initial value. I need to change my res so that I can do something like, if the sphere is if the sphere distance is less than torus distance, then the res will be a vec2 where the distance is the sphere and the ID is 0. And then the false return value will be a vec2 where I have a torus and I have an ID of 1. And so now the res will be a vec2 where the first value is the distance and the second value is my ID. And for the second step, for the second object, I will have a res x, because that's my distance. If the res x is less than my box value, then I can return the res as it is. Otherwise, I can return a vec2 with the box as a distance and an ID of 2. And that should work, but if I try to render it now, I will have a bunch of errors because now all of my map function will return a vec2, and the way I set up my code is for the map function to return a float. So every time I have a map, I need to change this either to be a vec2 as a return or to swizzle just the distance. So for the normal function, I really only need the distance. I don't need the ID, because whenever I'm going to get the normal, I'm already in the rendering stage where I already know the ID of the object, and so I can just get the distance just to get an evaluation of the surface around that point. So I can just swizzle the first value of the vec2, and that should work for this one. The camera does not have any map function in it. I need to also change the intersect function so that it returns a vec2 and not just a float, so that I can use the ID to do the coloring. And to do that, I just need to return the type, to change the type of the return value of the intersect function. I need to create an ID float that I'm going to return with my distance value, and my return is going to be a vec2 with the dist and the ID. The hit return value of the map, it will be a vec2, and my distance is going to be accumulated with the first value of the map return vector. And then also that goes as well for this, for the minimum distance. I need to extract to also use the first value of my map function. And last but not least, I need to set the ID to my hit y, because that will be my most recent ID, most recent object that I hit in my ray marching. In the final rendering step where I do my coloring, I need to change the return value of the intersect, because now the intersect is returning a vec2 with a distance and an ID. And then every time I have hit, I have to determine whether I'm using the distance, like in this case, to have the if statement that gives me a positive hit of an object. And then here in the normal also I need to pass the hit X. And now I can do something with the hit Y, meaning the ID, using it to do some coloring. What I could do, for instance, is use some sort of color generator, for instance, by doing the sign of my ID times a certain value, doesn't matter, and then adding a vec3 of some offset so that I get different colors. And then instead of having my white coloring multiplying my light, I can use my color, the color that I extracted from my ID, to multiply it for the lighting. And yes, and that works. The first value, the box, let's do 0. I will have some negative values because the sign is also returning negative values. If I do times 0.5 plus 0.5, now I have values that are between 0 and 1. So that's it for coloring. Next time I want to talk about lighting, do some basic lighting using what we have explored so far, and just kind of get deeper into the weeds of rendering with different lighting. So I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for a future episode. Feel free to check out my Patreon page, where you will find all of the patches, of course visuals, but also generative music, which is my other specialty. And until the next time, take care.